Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup, we're going to be taking a look at three important questions we've been hearing from international educators this past week that will hopefully help us shape how we do what we do in international education. So before we get to those questions, I want to give a special shout out to those that are watching live here on Facebook, those that watch on repeat on Facebook or on our YouTube channel for SMIE Consulting, and obviously those that download us and make us a regular part of their podcasting listening habits during the week. So it's always a pleasure to be sharing our thoughts with you on what's happening in our world of international education, a very fluid and ever-changing situation related to student enrollments this coming fall. We know what the big questions are there in terms of access to consulates and what happens if and when they do get to campus. Are vaccinations going to be required? We've talked about those over the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure we'll do that again in the coming weeks. But wanted to spend today focusing on some key topics that I've been hearing and having some decent conversations with other colleagues about that impact what we do moving forward with international education and particularly student recruitment. As always, we bring the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup to you on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. We do take our stories that we focus on and develop these questions around from our newsletter that comes out Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. That is all the SMIE news fit to share. And in case you're wondering, SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education, my two big passion areas for my work over the last 28 years now, coming up this July. So what I'd like to focus on today, I'm dropping the link to the most recent edition of the SMIE newsletter that you're welcome to subscribe to. You can also get to that via the SMIE website. That's smieconsulting.org/subscribe. That'll get you to the subscription page, and you can just fill out a couple key details, and you'll get this free subscription in your email inbox on Monday mornings every week. So what we'll do today, as we do each week, is we'll start with a question that kind of gets us thinking about how we do what we do in international ed. But this one is an appropriate one and does combine a lot of what I'm talking about in my work with a lot of my university clients. Is there a better way to release content to prospective students? And normally it's how we get our information out to students. We put a YouTube video up. We maybe have something on Facebook. We maybe put something on our website. But is there a way that we produce content regularly for our prospective students that keeps them engaged? And there was a great article, and the question is there a better way to release content? It really stemmed from an article I saw in Inside Higher Ed last week that had to do with enrollment marketing, digitally remastered part 2. And there was a part 1 piece that talked about redefining the role of in-person recruitment experiences alongside virtual ones, and that's something we can all relate to, obviously, in the last year with our almost complete shift to online recruitment as a way to reach our prospective students, and how we're talking now about, well, what's 2021 going to look like in the fall in terms of recruitment, spring 2022, will that be a return to more traditional physical recruitment? So there's still a lot of unanswered questions about when on timelines on this, but one thing is for sure, how students consume content, particularly from universities, is different. They are used to now relying on these online tools to get their information, to seek out those videos, to seek out content that's relevant for them. And one thing I really see and I love the way that this is really portrayed in this article. For those that remember, in terms of if you're fans of Disney movies at all, if you have young children who grew up on Disney, you might have grown up on Disney movies, you might be familiar with the old Disney Vault. This was the concept that Disney had that every so often they would release these movies out and make them available for the public to purchase or to watch. through on like a pay-per-view kind of a thing, or be able to buy the DVDs or VHS cassettes back in the day of those particular movies that were so highly sought after. But the challenge was they only did that every so often. So that one great movie you grew up on might only be out for a 6-month period once every 5-6 years. So it really limited your access to that information. And what the author in this article makes the comparison to, it's now not how students want and receive content is now more a Disney Plus version than a Disney Vault version, where there's a place that they can get information once every few years or once in a blue moon. To now having Disney Plus, where in addition to your favorite Star Wars series and all the Disney movies, all the Marvel movies are there as well. You get fresh content on a regular basis now on these channels. And that's something through and other streaming services as well, Hulu, Netflix, obviously, Amazon Prime. All of these are geared towards regular production lines of content for audiences, for key audiences. And should international education be anything different? And my answer is no, because one of my guiding principles in terms of how we reach and should reach students is to have a presence where they spend their time, live where your audiences live. I've been talking about this concept for well over 13 years. And at the core of it is being able to meet students where they are, meet your prospective students, parent audiences, counselors, whoever they might be, on platforms that they are familiar with, that they're using, that they can identify with, that provides for lack of a better phrase, 24/7 access to your best information. Now, what does that look like for enrollment marketing, for particularly international admissions folks? Ideally, it's a one-stop shop for all your content on the web, and that right now is probably an amalgamation of blogs that students write, videos you've done with current students, alumni, faculty that might be on YouTube. You might have content on the site for live chats, or you might do those on Facebook or other platforms. You may have a regular series of articles that come out. You have your communication flow by email that you also try and ideally replicate some of those themes across your content platforms. And the goal, I think, with this approach of meeting students where they are and providing them information in a timely manner, but also on an ongoing manner, that it's fresh content. It's really appropriate for students wherever they are in their journey. And the way I love this phrase that the author used is, and this is a quote from the author, Jay Murray, who's Associate Vice President for Enrollment Services at Western Connecticut State University. His kind of what sums it up for me is it's time for admissions officers to stop thinking about ourselves and start thinking about our prospects' media consumption habits as we measure the success of our efforts. And really what this is really getting to the heart of is it's not us, it's them, and it's how we're not producing this content for ourselves. We're producing it for our students. They are at the heart of why we do what we do, prospective students. And this is what, in admissions world, we need to be shifting our focus, and not necessarily doing events at times that are good for us, but making sure if we're doing a live event, doing it at the best times for the right audiences in the right parts of the world when it comes to international recruitment. So this is what I think is also the value of any live content you produce. The Zoom sessions you have with current students or future students, the faculty that might be involved in part of the content that you're delivering. So the live event is great, but don't let that content just live for that live event. Make content available on demand. When I want to go look at old Mandalorian episodes, old, there's only been 2 seasons, but when I want to look at Mandalorian episodes or some of the new series that Disney Plus has coming out, I know when that's happening. I can watch it when it first premieres, but I can also go back and watch it again. And I might not be available at the time that it premieres, but I want to see that content. So it's not just the initial premiere of content that's important. It's how that content is also repurposed. And this is something I preach all the time to university clients, is how you use what you have, not just for a one-shot deal for a live event, but the captured content that you have from a live event, having that edited down to manageable chunks in terms of responses to key answers, in terms of making that available on demand so that students in different parts of the world that weren't perhaps up at the time that you were available to watch it live can access it again, whether that's sending them the links to the recordings, putting an archive of those on your website. I know this was something we actually did with Education USA back in the early teens. Is we went with a video kind of warehouse provider. Brightcove was the platform that we used as a way to store our video content and make it available for prospective students at all times. So we were doing that pretty early on in EdUSA in terms of that having that digital content available whenever students wanted to access it. And that was YouTube sessions that we had done, videos that we had created, student interviews we had done, we uploaded onto YouTube, but we also made them available through other platforms on the Education USA site and other resources. So that had long-term value for us, and where we could track engagement and views of that content after the fact, not just at a live event. So I think there's a lot of value here in this thought, and I certainly want to give kudos to the author Jay Murray for kind of consolidating what I've been thinking and talking about for a number of months, if not years, with clients, is trying to put together that one-stop shop for your content where it can be a hub for all that you want to do. I know my colleagues over at IDP Connect, through their Hot Courses platforms, they've had the Content Hub for 3 or 4 years now. That's been a kind of a central place where foreign language content is, where student video is, where all the relevant pieces of the admissions puzzle that students need to know, costs, scholarships, admissions criteria, student reviews, that kind of thing can all be consolidated in one place. So that idea certainly has been around for a while, but I think now is the time when I think having such a hyper focus on virtual recruitment this year, it's really crystallizing in a lot of people's minds the need to have this kind of 24/7 access platform, website, content hub, whatever you want to call it, available for your future students. So great topic to start this with, and I know we'll certainly come back to this as we talk more about future recruitment efforts that different organizations are trying, certainly ones that I'm going to be piloting with a few, at least 2 or 3 organizations I'm working with currently. Now let's shift gears now and talk about a very sticky topic for U.S. higher education, and that is what's the impact is of anti-Asian sentiment in the United States on future students. We all will have stories of what our current campuses, our current communities are doing in terms of addressing these issues, forums that you've had on campus, virtually or in person, but talking about what is happening on your campus and how the situations are being addressed. And does it have an impact? Sure, it'll have an impact. It's potentially another reason why the U.S. might be seen as a less welcoming place in some people's eyes and in many people's eyes. Those that aren't here living it and experiencing it, when they hear things, that the fear is usually the first thing that comes up. And in parents' eyes, that's a huge concern. So particularly as it relates to anti-Asian sentiment, this is obviously where Asia is where 70% of our international students that come to the United States are from. So it's not just China, it's Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, most of South and East Asia, Philippines. So you get this even for Indian students, you have some of this, but this is mostly in terms of anti-Asian sentiment focused on East Asia. And that's unfortunately been feelings that have been stoked over the last 4 years with the previous administration's rhetoric that has resonated with a certain percentage, hopefully small percentage, of the U.S. population that just doesn't like things that are not from here. And that otherness is what that fear, external fear of the unknown, and really, even though many of the targets of these the incidents of hate and racism that have occurred towards the Asian community in the United States are directed at families and individuals that might have been born and raised in the United States, and parents one generation or two generations back might have emigrated to the U.S. from Asia. But I think there's two pieces to this that I want to address today, and two articles in particular. One in the PI News that highlights an IIE report highlighting key concerns for Chinese students. And that has to do in terms of what's top of the list for Chinese families as they're looking at the United States as a potential destination. Political tensions and all of that, misinformation that's been happening, a briefing document that IIE released shares that Chinese student decisions about study abroad, and this is the quote from the IIE document, briefing document, their decisions will be primarily affected by concerns for quality, financial considerations, and the impact of the pandemic both at home and in the possible host country, along with any ongoing travel restrictions and limitations to visa services. So that's Peggy Blumenthal, a longtime colleague of mine when I worked at IIE for Education USA. Someone who's been a leader in the field for decades, certainly one that's very highly regarded. She makes the point of that that future Chinese students coming to the U.S. are going to make their decisions based on those factors, not necessarily the anti-Asian sentiment, but the real issues of dealing with the pandemic and ongoing travel restrictions and access to visas. And we've talked about those before and how important that is. Those will be the primary drivers. And that is not just for the United States, that's also where they're looking at other destination countries, for the UK, for Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And we know for Australia and New Zealand, they're still shut out. New international students have been shut out since February of 2020. That because they can't physically get in country to Australia and New Zealand, and they are if they really want to study there, they had to start online. There's been a group obviously that started in the fall with U.S. institutions that did start online because they couldn't get in either because of lack of access to visa appointments. So are we going to see a similar series of events this fall that could impact Chinese numbers coming to the U.S.? It's possible, and a lot will depend on, as we've talked about, on whether U.S. consulates in China open up for visa appointments and regular routine service. Because you figure we've got a backlog. We've got 3 different groups that we're going to be dealing with for this fall. We've got the students that did start remote in the fall of 2020 that will expect to be able to come to campus this fall 2021. We've got students that deferred admission in fall of 20 to 21 and maybe took a gap year, did service, did other things in their home country, and then are deciding to come for good. And then you have a third group, all the new students that have applied in record numbers to a lot of elite schools in the U.S., not all schools, but a lot of elite schools. We'll share next week all the Ivy League admit rates, which are abysmally low this year, in terms of what the impact that being going test optional, that the pent-up demand, that the chance to be admitted to a top school when in years past, if you had certain test scores, not being able to take those test scores is actually an advantage this year because you still have strong academics. So we'll see what that looks like. So the title, the IIE Network report is a rising or ebbing tide. Do Chinese students still want to study in the U.S.? So I think Peggy's arguments here is that there are still unknowns that are going to drive future interest, many of which will be answered by the fall. Some of which we know are going to be key issues, the visa availability and vaccines, the double Vs. So those two issues can really hamstring us in U.S. institutions in terms of our ability to enroll Chinese students this fall. But because with the pandemic, I think we've turned our corner. But with the availability of vaccines now in many states to anyone 16 or older, that is going to push us towards that herd immunity that we've all been working towards or hoping for, where we can return to whatever a normal looks like. We've seen some states, though, against national approval or federal government approval, getting rid of their mask mandates. Those numbers, there are other states that are also going potentially mask-free in the next week or two. How those will impact decisions. What I think we also need to look at is just on the bigger picture, in addition to this IIE report, those that follow Karen Fisher's newsletter, from her newsletter Latitudes, that is one of the better resources for news stories and quick thoughts and hot takes on her background, particularly with working with Chinese students who have looked at the United States over the years that have come. She asks the questions is related to the anti-Asian sentiments and impacting future student interest. And we know that the U.S. hasn't scored high on the safety front for many years, certainly going back to pre-9/11 days. Safety has meant different things at different times in our history, depending on what group you might be representing in terms of what the concerns are, and what campus you might be on. That it's not a new phenomenon in the United States, anti-Asian racism, and Karen makes that point as well. But the question she asks is, if with the pandemic and now these shootings, has that changed how international students perceive racial attitudes and racism towards the United States? It's something that and she makes the fantastic point and very on point hot take here, and it's not a hot take, it's a pretty common sense thing when you think about it, but Chinese international students, in terms of knowing what racism is, they're coming from, as she makes the point, they're coming from a country where race is not she says, a salient social category. They don't have that in their vocabulary. It's an analytical lens of race. In their home country, China isn't an ethno-racial society as the United States is. So that they don't necessarily interpret it that their experiences as being targets of racism, knowing what to call when they get looked at funny or they get called certain things. They don't understand it necessarily. They don't identify it as racism. So it's interesting, and I appreciate Karen's takes on this. But one thing that I think is that, are there enough positives to outweigh this? And I think the only way that happens to kind of bridge that divide is for U.S. institutions to leverage their own current student experiences with this topic and how they've experienced it or not on their campuses, and what that looks like and how they've dealt with it. And is it something that keeps them up at night, or is it just something that they've learned to adapt to? The fact that anyone has to adapt to that is another question entirely, but painting that picture of how your current students are experiencing whatever it is always going to be at the heart of what will convince future students and parents about your campus one way or another. So that is a way to at least address these issues with future students if it becomes an issue. And certainly having that content available, as we talked about, when that is available, how it is available, how it's distributed, are all issues that you want to think carefully through, and where that information lives and how it becomes a part of your content plan. Much like we've talked in the past year how important it would be for institutions to really, when answering prospective student questions, prospective parent questions about what life is like on campus during a pandemic. That's obviously a big concern, because yes, by the fall, people will be mostly vaccinated and able to attend in-person classes, but there's still those concerns. How did your university treat your international students and any students really during the pandemic, and particularly those that are far from home, that haven't been able to get home because of travel restrictions. So that's a legitimate concern of future students and parents. And if you're not allowing and making and actually focusing on how your current international students have gone through this pandemic, how they have felt cared for by their international office, by the university, by the larger community. If that isn't part of the communication plan, that's a missed opportunity. And it may leave unanswered questions in the mind of your future students and parents' audience, their minds, as to whether or not you do really mean what you say in terms of caring for students. Everybody says they do, but are you really? And what's the proof of that? The proof of that is with your current students who can share their experiences. Now, how valuable is that in the overall scope of things in terms of messaging that you have, messages of your institution, your university's stories, in terms of what better reflects putting your money where your mouth is in terms of an institution than the care that you've demonstrated over the last year for your current students. That will speak volumes and can last, and that will last you serve you in good stead for many months to come with your current students, but also the future students that see the evidence of that. So making that a part of it, part of your plan to deal with issues like the pandemic, like anti-Asian sentiment, is engaging with your current students, making sure that they feel their voices are heard, and that in ways to help capture that message and to relay that to future students is an important part of that puzzle. So, last piece I want to cover today is a question that has been front and center in my mind for a number of months, and if not years, in terms of what should or who should a senior international officer be. And this is something that is important. Senior SIOs, as we call them, senior international officers, normally these folks are going to be folks that regularly are going to AIEA conferences for senior international educators, or it might be in the leadership group in NAFSA, the knowledge community for leadership in international IEL, international education leadership, that are these senior leaders. There's trainings for these folks as they come into their positions. Is who gets these jobs? What do you have to have? And almost always you need to have a doctorate of some sort to even have a chance at some of these jobs, it seems. But what I've seen, there was an article here in University World News that we'll talk about, where it says only experienced international educators need apply. And when you think about it, SIO, a senior leader that represents a campus's international education efforts, their strategy, their policy, it has to be a fairly high level position at an institution if they're taking international seriously. And then there's two ways to tell. Is your SIO a person that reports directly to the president or to the provost, the two senior leaders on your campus? If that's their direct report line, then chances are it does have a high priority at that institution. Is it a doctorate required or someone who has extensive experience in international education? Now, what normally happens at a lot of institutions is it's a faculty member or a dean that's led creation of study abroad programs or partnerships, not typically going to be someone who's risen through the ranks of international admissions or student recruitment. You may get an international student services person that rises up to that point. Again, typically if they have a doctorate, where at institutions where I think it's international education is taken as a priority. Again, report line, doctorate required typically, and a background in international ed. And I think the article makes that point, that this is how it should be, who an SIO should be, is someone with that concrete experience, but who is a senior leader, who does have the ear of the president or provost in terms of decisions that impact the entire campus. Now, there are two extremes I've seen at a lot of institutions that do not have SIOs. They're either Large schools that have lived on reputation and haven't seen, and in terms of incoming international students, they haven't really done anything more than an if you build it, they will come approach. They haven't been very active in engagement. Their institutional partnerships tend to be fairly limited. That those campuses are the ones that probably who might be recognizing the need to have an SIO, that maybe see, okay, we need to internationalize. What's an important component of that? First, having a plan, but as part of that plan, if you don't already have one, an SIO should be a part of that plan, is having someone at the senior level that provides that leadership specifically for international implications and efforts, whether that's inbound international, whether that's outbound study abroad students, whether that's institutional partnerships and what guides those partnerships, research fellows and all of these pieces, internationalizing the curriculum. There's a lot of different components to internationalization, obviously, that may or may not get addressed depending on what the priorities are of an institution. But having that SIO can at least provide that senior level leadership as to what that should look like. And having the access to the leadership and having their ear makes a lot of sense. Now, on the other end of the extreme, when it comes to SIOs, I've seen regrettably, institutions that might have good international admissions, might have decent study abroad, but have nobody at that top level that should have an SIO but don't, and it usually gets relegated to a faculty member if it is created as just a convenience rather than any kind of structural plan that makes sense on a long-term basis to fulfill institutional mission. So the other flip side of institutions that don't have it, that are now, they're hurting and they're struggling. They've had a lot of layoffs. I've seen one institution, a private institution that I know is financially struggling. They have put out, I saw a job posting for this institution that was for an international education coordinator that would coordinate both study abroad and international admissions. And this person would be an entry-level position. That didn't necessarily have to have experience in study abroad or international admissions, but that person would be de facto an SIO on that campus by covering both study abroad and admissions. So I can guarantee you that institution does not have international as a priority if you're making an entry-level person responsible for study abroad and international admissions. That just does not make any sense in the long term, and that's something that I think is an institution that is clearly not either not going to be around much longer or doesn't really have an understanding of what having both study abroad and international admissions in one person's role as a senior leader. Having the role of a senior leader, but being an entry-level position. So those are the kind of troubling ones that signal to me that that's an institution that needs a lot of help. Needs to probably scrap everything and start over, and maybe not in a position to do that because of the effects of the pandemic and other things that have gone on, the closing of programs and other things that might and have impacted a lot of universities around the country. So those are my thoughts for today on what's happening with international education this past week, and thinking a little bit more on future topics for this. I know I'll be sharing some thoughts on as I develop some platforms that answer some of these questions that we're talking about here. But it's really a pleasure to come to you each week, and I really enjoy the opportunity to share my thoughts on international ed topics, and hope that you find some nuggets in here that are of value to you in your work. So until next time, I wish you the very best and have a wonderful day. Cheers.